Hey everyone, thanks for checking in here again. My name is Eric Connor. I'm a therapist at Recovery Restore Counseling outside of Chicago. And I love doing these videos just to talk about some concepts or principles around everyday life and to help us to think about things that we wouldn't normally think about, or ways of looking at things that maybe aren't as obvious. So to that extent, today I want to talk about habit versus addiction. Bad habit, something that I probably need to do something about, versus is this something more serious? Am I on my way to something that's a little more clinical? This is a great question, and it's absolutely okay to ask and to look at. In this video, I want to talk about kind of my take on this in three different areas. I want to talk about three things that maybe aren't as obvious or aren't maybe as intuitive as we explore what we may be struggling with. Now, if you go out there and kind of search around addiction assessments, there's some great ones. And a lot of them will kind of look at some of the biggies, like, you're having big consequences in work or in life. Are those around you asking you to stop? Is it really impacting your ability to function? And those are obviously all very important questions. And if the answer is yes to one or more of those, we really have to take a deeper dive at that. But I want to speak to people where maybe there aren't like a lot of consequences yet. Maybe we're not sure if this is really impacting us, and we're trying to see what it really is about. So with that, let me tell you kind of three things I want us all to be thinking about. The first thing I want us to look at is the role of thinking around this behavior or around the substance that you are possibly struggling with or thinking about. It may not be widespread known, but addiction isn't so much about what we see, but there's a big part of addiction that is also about the addictive mindset. And in a lot of ways, addiction is actually a thinking disease as much as it is the outward manifestation of the behavior. So what a lot of addicts will report is that they may only engage in their drug of choice for maybe a few hours, but they would say they were thinking about it for several hours beforehand. I mean, there's lots of stories where I've talked with lots of people, men and women, where they may be going about their day or they may be at work, and then the thought comes at maybe noon or 1 about they can't wait to get home and either drink, eat, or use, or whatever their drug of choice is. And that the mind gets going on it and it can't stop. And we call that an obsessional focus. And it actually builds throughout the day. And it's almost like it's our body's way of like building the tension so that we will eventually get to the place where we're going to go use. And that's because there's a lot of dopamine and other neurochemicals associated with that. So we have a part of our body that is actually working against what we might decide in our frontal cortex or our decision making. So how much we're thinking about it matters, or as they say in AA, sometimes it's not even so much about how much you're drinking, but how much are you thinking about drinking. So I would say if you're struggling with something and you're thinking about it a lot, or it feels like it's getting a bit obsessional, that's the first thing to really pay attention to. That shows there's some brain change happening. That shows that you could be progressing into something that's a little more clinical. So it's something important to pay attention to. The second point I want to bring up may sound a little funny, but is this substance or is this behavior, is it becoming its own relationship with you? Are we forming a relationship with it? Let me explain that for a second here. Things like food, things like alcohol, when used in a healthy way, they're simply objects by which we can connect to other human beings. So we can go out and we can have a dessert with someone, or we can have a good meal. But the focus isn't the meal in and of itself. The focus is on the community and is on the connecting with the people at that meal. What happens when we are getting closer to addiction, we're actually starting to develop a relationship around the actual object. So, say food addicts or alcoholics, they may be out and it may seem like they're out interacting with people, but if you can see inside their head, they're actually mainly focused on the actual food or the actual drink. And the people there are almost a periphery to the real focus of attention. So they can still be there, But instead of having the food or having the drink or whatever the case might be to help engage with others, they're now just focusing on the relationship with the actual object. And in a way, that's a bit kind of pathological. It's a bit insane, but that's what's happening with the brain. And the reason is that we're now developing an emotional relationship with this thing. I have men and women that come in here and they struggle with pornography, and they can have like a lot of shame, and they'll say things like, well, I just got to stop. This is just dumb. It's just time to give it up. But they're not understanding that even though it's just these screens and what we're looking at, there's a part of their nervous system that has actually formed a relationship with it, meaning that to our bodies, this thing actually makes us feel comforted. This thing actually makes us feel, take some stress away. It actually makes us feel like we're not alone or I'm not lonely. And that's not just with, say, internet issues. That could be with any drug of choice. There's something about it that we are having a relationship with the object. And that's why a lot of people that are kind of diagnosed addicts, they don't need to be with people. Sometimes they'll talk about they would be at a party and they actually want to leave the party to get home to be by themselves, because this object is actually becoming like a friend to them. And it's actually becoming where they celebrate life, where they can have self-pity with this thing, whatever the case may be. So that's important to think about. When you're out with people, are you still focused on the social aspect? Or are you now focusing more on this relationship that you may be actually developing with an inanimate object? The third point I want to mention is, are you experiencing shame around this behavior or this action? Are you experiencing shame? Now let me first of all define a bit around shame. A lot of times we discuss here the difference between guilt and shame. And guilt essentially is something like, I've done something wrong and I need to make a corrective action for that. I need to make an amends, or I need to change something in the future to kind of reestablish my integrity around this thing. Shame is a more corrosive, destructive message that feels more permanent. So whereas guilt might say, I'm a good person that did a bad thing, shame would say something like, I'm a bad person that does bad things. Now, the reason that shame's important is that when we are going closer to an addictive relationship, if we are moving closer to lack of choice or powerlessness, a lot of times we're going through these cycles where we're starting to realize we don't want to do what we're doing, or we're trying to put some boundaries around it and it's not working. Now, when there isn't an addictive relationship, when our kind of true self around this action is intact, when we still have the power of choice, then we might experience guilt, but that can be healthy, because guilt is just a kind of a warning that the next time we're in that situation, we don't want to act the same way, and we can usually follow through on that. But when we're experiencing shame, we're probably experiencing something where we are trying to change something and we can't. And when that happens, it's very stressful on our brains and our bodies, and then we start to experience some despair, we start to experience some shame. And the shame is something that will tell us that there's something wrong with me. And that, again, is a very kind of destructive element that can happen inside of us. The other thing is that when we're developing an addictive relationship with something, it tends to draw us inward, or it tends to isolate us. Additionally, if we feel like there's a problem, we're probably not talking about it with people. So to some extent, we're having secrets, or we're maintaining secrets around it. Well, isolation, secrets, not following through on decisions, that's like kind of the perfect mix for shame. So if you're experiencing shame around this action, we also need to pay attention to that. That could be a signal that we're losing control over this and that we're not having kind of a healthy relationship with it. So take a look at that as well and think about whether this is a healthy guilt mechanism, or if this is starting to be something that's really making me feel like I'm less of a person. So those are the three things that I wanted to bring up in this video, and things for us to think about. And if you are watching this and you are experiencing shame, or you do realize maybe there's an obsessional component, or you're feeling isolated, or whatever the case may be, and maybe you do think that there's something more significant here, that's okay. I think people, they're so afraid to admit that, but the reality is so many of us have got things that we're working on and we got to be careful about. And really, that's why we're doing this video. If you're watching now and there could be something that you, if you know, in your gut, you know it's not harmless, it's not innocent, it's becoming serious, well, let's take action today. Just talk to someone about it. I've worked with so many guys that they say with remorse, you know, they wish like a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, they had an idea something was going on, but they didn't take action. They just found a way to kind of try to ignore it, or the brain was using some denial, and then another few years pass. And don't let that be you. Because if it is an addictive disorder, an addictive relationship, these things, they don't stay the same. They generally expand and they generally get worse, and we have more consequences. So if something's going on, let's open up, talk with someone. That part of you that is engaging in this behavior, this substance, is going to want to keep you in isolation. But we really, the best thing we can do is just to kind of reach out to someone. Doesn't need to be a therapist or anything like that. It could be a good friend, but it's like, hey, you know what? I got to talk with someone. I'm nervous. This thing's been going on, and I could have a problem. And then just start with that. So I hope this was helpful, and I hope you have a great day, and we'll be back soon with another topic. Thanks so much.